episode number 2 of Live Lunch. We were calling it episode number 2, but this is actually the 4th or 5th episode that we've done. We've just discounted all the...
We're a bit like...
the drivel that was shared in the previous episodes.
Well, the artist formerly known as Prince, because I'm old, he did an album in the 80s that was just so hot and amazing that they never actually went. It was just so good.
Yeah.
And we've done that. We've done our unknown album, basically.
Oh, hello.
So
hello,
good.
we have your lunch.
We have lunch
There you go.
from Taco Bell.
Taco Bell.
Seriously?
Yes, Ben.
There are your drinks.
Seriously?
Yes.
Wait, I didn't even know you had Taco Bell around here. Did this get flown in?
Got it.
Delivery.
Seriously?
Orange Tango. Taco Bell has opened up in Brighton only a few months ago, which is really exciting. I have never had Taco Bell before.
I knew nothing about
I'm
it.
really looking forward to this.
I need to get out more. My kids will be very jealous. Don't let them, you. This is for me. No, I will bring some home for them.
I think you should take some home for the kids. But
This
wow,
shit, yeah.
Ben Watson, thank you so much for organising this for us. Have you had Taco Bell before?
Yeah.
Have you? I've never had Taco Bell before.
No, I overseas in another country, but I didn't. Yeah, it's new. It's like it's come to us from afar. We are blessed.
It's actually all the way from America.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. And is it making a lot of noise in the microphones, or can you?
Loads of noise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Let's keep that going. Okay. I'll perhaps eat a little bit later, but I'm going to try and.
So we need to give it the Virgo score. So
All right, give it a sec. So what
at
have we
some
got
point
here?
when you try something,
What have we got?
you've got to tell us.
One's a volcano meal.
Okay. So is it Russian roulette? We don't know who's got the volcano meal.
Yep.
So whoever keels over, except you wouldn't anyway, because your hand's very good with food that's hot. I'm terrible with it.
Link to the stereotype.
I know. Sorry about that.
Did you get the volcano? I really hope you did.
Well, we'll find out. No, that's not too bad.
This looks volcano-esque.
It's not too bad. But it does feel a little spicy, actually. You know, some food kind of creeps up on you about a minute later. No, I won't have any of that. Do you think it's spicy? Do you think that's spicy? The answer is yes. Yeah, I'm not having it. It's fine. I'm happy with my old one, with my simple one, the simple men.
Oh wow, that is nice. But I can feel it kicking in. And if I need to stop talking,
Stop breathing.
yeah, it's nice. I think.
Do you mind if I have this drink? Or do you want this? Do you want the tango? Do you want this one?
What's the Virgo score on your thing?
Okay, that's good. I'm going to give it a 7.
A 7.
Yeah.
Is that a 7 on 100?
No, it's a plain 7 out of 10. It tastes good. It's going to be filling.
7
I
on
think
10.
it's good. Yeah.
So-
So Taco Bell, they can stay. Welcome to Brighton.
Welcome to Brighton Taco Bell.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so
We
much.
like this stuff. May you.
This
prosper.
is not an ad. In case people are thinking that we get sponsored by Taco Bell.
There are other Mexican food outlets.
Yeah. It'd be cool to be sponsored. Emmanuel,
That
brought
are
to you
actually
by
right.
Taco Bell.
Yeah.
We've got a cake and Jesus.
Okay.
So this Sunday we looked at the last talk in our Creed series, Why I Believe. Yeah, it's been a fantastic series. How have you found it?
Yeah, I found it. All kinds of things. It's not what I'm used to, because we tend to go through books of the Bible or passages of the Bible over periods of time, and that's kind of provides you with what you're teaching on. With the Creed, it's like one massive subject every week, the way we've been doing it, and you can never really do it justice in one message at all, and so you have to sort of choose a theme within the theme. So, for example, talking about the forgiveness of sins, there was so much more that one could say about it, and you sort of think, well,
Really?
choose.
You had so much more to say on something.
It's
Wow.
always hours more. So it's been a bit of a tricky task to try and choose the things that seem most appropriate and pray about it and sense, I guess, on a personal level, on a spiritual level, just in prayer. What are the things particularly that need to be emphasised? and all of the things that will help us as a church, particularly around this theme. But it's been good. I've been struck by how the creed. It's interesting to me how it insists on talking about eternal matters. It talks about death a lot more than we would. I think if the creed got written in the 21st century, if you asked a group of standard 21st century believers, they might come up with something slightly different. They might, and I think it's good for us that actually we have something from an ancient time. It's good for us to be exposed to something old, something that can critique our way of thinking, our way of seeing things. And I think that's partly what preaching is for. It's meant to speak to us from outside of our age and our space and help us to reflect a little bit on what we assume. So,
in my eyes, exposure to you is exposure to the old. You are an old man.
Really?
You are an old man.
I like to bring that.
Which is.
I know I look very young, but I'm actually 800 years old.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I would have been you're like 49.
Oh, really? Oh man, that's so cheeky. Because if I actually contradict you, it looks petty.
Is it?
And I'm not petty.
Okay. Good.
So I won't contradict you. I'll let the world think that I'm 6 years older than I am.
Really?
Than you said. Younger than you said. Sorry.
Okay. 6 years older than.
6 years older. No,
so
the world
15,
thing. No, forget. I'm
55.
confused. If you want to know how old I am, that's for people to find out. But who cares?
Okay.
My wife.
Have you had a personal favourite of the Creed series?
In terms of teaching through it.
When you look back on a Sunday evening after you've done all three preachers, and you got your cigar and your whiskey out, and you're like,
yeah,
I nailed that one. That was
and
the one.
my sort of Steps album, and no, the Steps were a band in the 90s who were rubbish. Let me think. The one. Oh, sorry, have I offended? Sorry, Megan. They were amazing. They were messianic. They were the answer to the world's problems. Steps.
Yeah. 5, 6, 7, 8.
I have an answer. I can't remember what the question was, but I know I have an answer. The best one. I guess maybe doing the one about the fact that Jesus is God come in the flesh. Jesus is the Son of God.
You just played the Jesus cards.
I did play the Jesus
was
cards. It would have been the wrong answer if I said no. So I thought to be safe, go for that one.
Well done.
I didn't want to say the one about cheese.
Safe answer.
The one about pastry. That was the best one. No,
I think
I chose the safe one.
And
I
so,
believe in
so
pastry.
this Sunday you spoke on life everlasting and the resurrection of the body.
Tell you what, I believe in pastry this week. That was the link. Sorry. Yes, I did. Resurrection of the body.
Do your 30-second summary of the preach.
Okay. So, it's what we said earlier about the subject of death was kind of the framework that we don't, as a culture, particularly dwell on it as much as we might have done in previous generations, and yet the Bible doesn't just dwell on death in itself; it dwells on it as something over which Jesus has been victorious. That Jesus is defeated it, and that is the grounds for our hope, for our confidence. Why is it that Christians have been able to go to their deaths in the arena with the lions, or get burned at the stake in various times in history for their faith? Why have they done it often with confidence, even with joy? I mean, crazy, but not crazy if you consider what confidence was in them because of Jesus' victory over death. And we talked about why it's a positive thing, especially in terms of the bodily resurrection. It's a physical thing, and the life everlasting doesn't just mean ongoing existence. It means enjoying Jesus, who is life in himself.
Yeah. I've been reading a little bit about Roman history, and I think one of the reasons why it took the Romans so long to accept Christianity as a religion, probably about 300 years after the death of Jesus, and the beginnings of the early church, was the refusal of the early church to acknowledge the emperor or Caesar being God. And the irony was they proclaimed that their Caesars were immortal, and yet the graves of Caesars would immediately deny that. And there's always been this fascination with immortality and delaying death. And it's interesting because even when you watch TV shows where they do talk about immortality, and there's something currently on Netflix called Altered Carbon, which looks at people who prolong their life for hundreds of years through technology, which could happen in the next few centuries. I don't know, it could. And yet that immortality and that extension of life somehow tends to take away any form of punishment and justice. And almost people who live long seem to prolong their lives into evil and dictatorship and an abuse of the poor and suppression of rights. So it is fascinating. On one hand, immortality can be seen as unjust, and yet we want to prolong immortality. I guess my question is, why is the Christian view of immortality a good, positive view?
Well, I guess, I mean, it's interesting. In the book of Proverbs in the Bible, it talks a lot about living longer because you do the right thing. And then it begins to, if we listen to the book of Proverbs thoughtlessly and just read it as a bunch of slogans, it can seem as though the point is, if you want to live a bit longer and have a happy time, do these things and you'll be fine. That nearly rhymed. And I think
such a rapper.
Yeah, it just comes to me. So I think the book of Proverbs actually is one of those things that Christians sometimes wrestle with. What is the way we handle this? Because we see what looks the opposite happening. People who are unjust and wicked seem to often do well, and people who are righteous and even kind do badly often. The fact is, that's the real way that life often does go. And you have to really step back and say, well, if we don't understand the wisdom of living well in the context of eternity, we are going to get very confused by this whole subject. And we need to understand that ultimate true life as it's been won for us through what Jesus has done is not just kind of existence carries on until further notice, just indefinitely carrying on existence. No, there's a purpose to it. There's a goal to it. It's called life everlasting, not existence everlasting. And life, biblically understood, is all about the quality, the eternal life that Jesus calls us to. He always defines it qualitatively. He doesn't just say it's never going to end. He talks about life as knowing God and his son, Jesus, whom he'd sent in John chapter 17. Life is about experience. It's qualitative. It's knowing someone. That's the way to live. And so just to carry on existing, even if doctors can help us to live into, way past 120, I don't know what will happen in the next few generations in terms of life expectancy, but that's not the definition of immortality. Even if they define immortality that way, immortality is not even that helpful a concept, because resurrection life, in the Christian understanding, is totally new. It's dynamic. It's joy-filled. It's relationship. It's utterly fulfilling. It's satisfying on a level that we couldn't even understand now, because we don't even have the capacity to understand it. Our bodies, our lives, our existence here, everything about creation has been tainted and stained and messed up by sin. We're going to inherit something that's not only better, but we'll have the capacity to enjoy the better. And so it doesn't compute with just the sort of dull idea of just carrying on existence for a bit longer.
In this world.
In this world that still needs to be restored.
Why do you think there has to be a material renewal? Why can't God just take us into the clouds and we be those ethereal cloudy beings floating around playing harps and with cute little wings and loincloths?
Do you want to?
No.
Does that appeal to you?
No, definitely not.
No, I don't think it would take long. For most people, I think it's the fact that God says that creation is good, and he says that from the very first page, and existence is that God's given us as human beings is in the context of material stuff that God blesses and says it's good, and I'm sure that that there are all kinds of things that we can sort of get a clue about now, that we think, well, I enjoy this, therefore what I'm looking forward to in a restored, resurrected body and resurrected universe will be that with multiplying.
What are you most looking forward to in the resurrected life? What is that thing that you're looking forward to in the resurrected life?
I don't know. I think maybe
really good dark chocolate. Rich, dark chocolate.
Is that what you're going for?
I think so.
Particularly?
Yeah.
Okay. So not
It just
not,
came to my mind.
not Milky Bar.
Oh gosh, no. I do not like milky chocolate.
Yeah.
Dark,
Okay.
rich chocolate.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, it's yours, Charlie.
Thank you.
You can have the factory.
Thank you.
Excellent.
You did talk about Jesus being the life.
The life.
Yeah. The life.
Yeah.
Rename Jesus to the life.
Mm.
Not the one, the life.
Yes.
Sorry. Bad. And yes, you did unpack a bit of what that is,
Yeah,
and why
yeah.
Jesus is the life.
Yeah.
So rather than redoing all of that,
Yes.
could you talk to us about how could we now live in the fullness of that and in the knowledge that Jesus is the life? How do we live on this side of eternity with that in mind?
Yeah. I guess. I mean, I think I remember. I think it was John Wimber in the 1980s. I think he was talking about the early stages of church going that he was exposed to as a new Christian. So he'd become a Christian. So this is a guy who was a pastor in the 70s and 80s, 90s. He died in the late 90s. And he had an extraordinary story, remarkable person. It's worth looking up John Wimber and finding a little bit about what he did and achieved and some of his story. But he talked about how early in his Christian life he was talking to someone who has been a Christian a little bit longer about what Christian life involves, and they described it very much in terms of just doing the kind of nice Christian things that one ought to do, that the practical routine things of going to church and so on. And it was quite it's quite an interesting response that Wimber gives. He says, what about this stuff that I saw the early Christians doing, the adventures they got into, the kind of things that they did, the kind of prayers they got answered, the kind of signs and wonders, the kind of impact they had on their communities and on society, that stuff. And the person said back to them, well, you shouldn't expect to see that stuff. You should just expect to be a steady, stable, faithful churchgoer. And John Wimber said, but I gave up drugs for this. And I've often thought, I've heard people say similar things. I didn't give up my sin for a boring life. And it's a very kind of crude way of making, I think, a very valid point. There is another day we'll talk about the delight that God takes in our steady, faithful, routine, ordinary obedience. The point is, Jesus did come and say, I have come that you might have life and life in all its fullness. And that should at least tantalize us and whet our appetites. It should at least cause us to think there is more. There's always more enjoyment of God. There's always more expectation of God. There's always more to see of what he will do. There is always more answers to prayer, more adventures, more to grow, more. And yet, genuine excitement, some adrenaline rushes, some moments of hilarity, some moments of pain, suffering, waiting, delay, all of it for sure. It's not all just sugar, but nevertheless, it is life. It's life we're meant to pursue, and to too simply and complacently kind of lapse into a dullness and an assumption that, I just go through a dreary experience because at least at the end of it I get kind of airlifted out. That's not Christianity. He's come for us to enjoy real life even in the here and now.
Do we have any questions from the audience, maybe?
We do. This one is quite important. Do you wear your hat only at live lunch, or do you wear it on other days?
I do wear it on other occasions.
Really good question.
Believe it or not, I do. It's a good question.
Very
The
good
reason I'm wearing it now is because it's magical, and it does actually it helps to generate all the power in the cameras and stuff. It's in a way that no one can understand. A lot of these guys have got things plugged into power sockets here. The fools, they don't realise they don't need to. This hat is sustaining the power of this broadcast, I'm pleased to say.
It doesn't help you with brief answers, though.
No,
I
it
think
doesn't.
we do need to
I need to
find
wear something
a
else. For
magic
that.
hat that
Maybe if I wore nothing, like, this would be a lot briefer.
Hang on.
where nothing as in no headwear rather than nothing.
Well, no, because it would make the answers extremely quick because I'd be wanting to get out of here.
Great. Okay.
You understand?
Make the room more. No, actually, make the room more uncomfortable for you.
Well, yeah, and everyone, yeah.
For everyone else.
Yeah, but anyway, I'm sure
Sorry.
that was the best
What-
question we've
is that
got.
the-
But if there are any others,
Well, we have two more, but I mean, they are saying you look a bit like Peaky Blinders, so that's a good thing, though.
yeah, is it a good thing?
That's a good thing.
Have you not watched Peaky Blinders?
I don't have razor blades under here, just so you know. That's
Mate.
not. I should have said that in my first. Yeah, I don't have any violent equipment up here. It's just magic.
Is it?
Yeah. But maybe next week I will bring a weapon, just in
Lead.
case. Just in case it gets a little bit, turns a bit nasty in here, which could happen.
Illustrious Brighton has said that in the preach you said Jesus had known John since childhood. Was it John at the Last Supper or John the Baptist?
I was talking about John the disciple, John, the Apostle John, who I think is the one that wrote John's Gospel and the letters, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and the book of Revelation. I didn't say that Jesus knew him from childhood. I think that John met Jesus when John was probably a teenager, because he was one of the disciples, and Jesus was a rabbi, and he would have had disciples that gathered with him. In the culture, they would have been more likely to be young men, as in very young men, not in their 30s, but probably more likely in their late teens, maybe 20s. So that's what I meant by that. Yeah.
Rachel Fellingham says, Revelation says no more death. Isaiah says rich food full of marrow. Will we be eating big courgettes?
I did think that. I thought, how much time have we got to understand the marrow thing? The whole marrow thing is obviously, it could. Who knows what marrow is being referred to? I don't know. Marrow is the stuff inside bones, isn't it?
Yeah.
And people do eat that, right? People think, that's the best bit of like a T-bone steak. Is that true?
Yeah.
Do you like marrow?
I do like marrow actually. Yeah.
As in the stuff in bones?
Yeah. Though my wife tells me off for eating the marrow.
Is
So
she?
I get it.
Because what? It's just.
She might tell me off when I
So
get back home.
here's the thing: it might not be. Who knows what we'll eat? Because I don't know if we'll be killing animals. Maybe there'll be veggies. I don't know. In the new heavens and new earth, will we have meat? So that's not a
Vegan's
question.
paradise.
I'm not here to answer that question. But it may be that's where Isaiah 25 is being more figurative. But just the point is that it's stuff that we will physically enjoy. The stuff that you really enjoy now, like banquets. That's what God wants to say. Do you enjoy it now? Is it something you can give thanks for? If it is, then bring it on.
But it's
Keep it
fascinating
coming.
because there's some things that you might give thanks for, which I wouldn't, and
Yeah.
vice versa.
Okay,
And so who gets what they want?
good question.
That is a very good question. Isn't it?
Which we're now going into the mysteries.
I just think it's like sections
Yeah,
of what your favorite type of food is.
yeah. I don't know. Like a huge food court. I don't like that idea. It's not.
Taco Bell?
No.
But I think we can agree that heaven is going to be an amazing place and the fulfillment of senses,
Well, yeah, and even the
enjoyment.
even the language of heaven as the place is not quite even that is in itself is not quite right, because
Are you correcting me?
I'm slightly correcting you in a gentle, loving way, brother, because the emphasis is on God restoring the heavens and the earth, and to think about going to heaven can slightly kind of reinforce the idea of a kind of other non-physical existence. Yeah.
Well, I have a fascinating story from this weekend. I was in Germany over the weekend where I got to see my mum, which was great. But we were there in quite sad circumstance. It was a family tragedy, and we were having to deal with death. And so I was with my mum in this little town in the south of Germany, walking past all like the worst, and it was a Saturday afternoon food market. It was brilliant, lovely. Oh, the smell of worst. It's just amazing. Anyway, and so we were talking about some of the scripture and truth that the Bible talks about death and resurrection and saying all of this stuff to kind of encourage ourselves. And then my mom stopped me and she said, "Do you know that all of this is truth, but it's not because you're saying it. And I thought, that is really profound.
Mm.
Because we can often see truth as our response to circumstance, and I've experienced something and so I'm going to recite some truth and kind of let that get into my spirit. And I do not think that's wrong by any means.
Sure.
But truth predates those experiences.
Right.
Truth predates joy and sorrow and suffering,
Yes.
and it's the reality in which we live.
Yeah.
And so our experience then becomes a response to the truth that we heard
Yeah.
or that we've read in scripture. And so the reason why we've called this series Creed Why I Believe rather than What I Believe is tipping our hat to that and saying the truths that we read about in the creed exist, even the writing of the creed,
Yeah.
and they existed, I guess, even before the creation of the world. The truths about God and the Trinity, and of course then the creed does talk about creation
Sure.
and this lifetime. But it was just a really special moment of pausing, and I think pastorally and in situations I found that really helpful, because I don't let my experience shape what I believe. I let my belief shape my experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and now understanding and now talking of that. So I think this series has been fantastic. And
It's-
we've really enjoyed it.
It's so easy to imagine ourselves trying to keep the truth going, keep the Christian life going, keep ourselves going as Christians. I suppose if we get into that way of thinking, we've missed something. Perhaps we've forgotten that it keeps us going. That the truth is there to support us. Otherwise,
Yeah.
a God that you have to keep supporting is not a very good God.
Mm.
A God that holds you
30 seconds left, guys.
of the whole thing.
I've loved the series, but I think I'm going to keep going back to it.
Mm.
This Sunday we're starting a new series.
We are.
10 seconds on the new series.
So we're starting on Sunday, the 2nd of December, The Gift, which is anticipating Christmas, Advent, come.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us. This video will go on YouTube, and our podcast information will be found below. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.